This is actually part 2 of a multi-part series, so if you haven't seen part 1, you should check out our channel, go back and watch that one first. Two-stroke bikes are lighter than four-stroke bikes. This really comes in handy when you're off-road. There are situations where the way that a four-stroke handles can come in handy. I'm not going to say that four-strokes suck in the mountains or that they suck on single track. I'm just saying that my opinion is that extra weight is a factor when you're riding off-road. The best enduro riders in the world that are doing off-road and that are doing hard enduro, guys like Graham Jarvis and Andreas Littenbeckler and Tadej Blazusiak, Johnny Walker, these types of guys are picking two-strokes for a reason. And these are both two-stroke bikes, so not only do they weigh a little bit less than a four-stroke, but they feel even lighter because there's less rotating mass in these bikes, right? I mean, you don't have so many moving parts in the motor, and anyone who's ridden these things back to back will tell you the two-stroke always feels lighter. Even if they weighed the same amount, they feel lighter. When you're out doing off-road and enduro style riding, a lot of times you find yourself in some pretty tight, technical, gnarly situations where you don't have a lot of room to go very fast and you end up needing to be real low down in the RPM range. Maybe it's on a real tight switchback, maybe it's over a really really loose rocky section, maybe it's just huge rock outcroppings. What tends to happen when you're in these types of situations is it becomes very easy to flame out your bike. It's not nearly as easy, though, to flame out your bike if you're on a two-stroke, specifically like a 300 two-stroke. It's almost impossible to kill one of these bikes if you even have the throttle open the slightest amount. That's because on a two-stroke bike, the compression isn't quite so high. Two strokes give you a major benefit because the piston fires every time it comes to the top of the cylinder. In the four-stroke, there's an extra stroke in there where the exhaust stroke happens, and there's a ton of compression on those bikes. The timing is very far advanced, and so it's easier for those four-stroke, high compression, hot rod motors to flame out at low RPMs, and that's something that you don't want when you're doing technical off-road riding. So for this section, I definitely give the nod to the two-stroke motor. They don't flame out nearly as easily as a four-stroke will at low RPMs. Two strokes. When I transitioned from my four-stroke to a two-stroke, I felt it was a big difference. It was a big difference. Not only did I have more wheel spin on the two-stroke, but it just felt more like riding a mountain bike. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that was kind of something that I definitely was not expecting. So there was a little bit of a transition where you're trying to figure out where the power is, how the power gets to the ground on a two-stroke, and but man, it's a lot of fun. There's nothing like the way that the power comes on a two-stroke. It's just like, and it's not all or nothing either. Right. A lot of our viewers probably had experience on maybe like an RM65. We have one of those here at camp, and man, that thing's all or nothing.
Yeah, and so a lot of us have grew up around those old two-strokes, especially like the 65s, the YZ85s, and we were afraid of them because once that power came, which meant you twisted the throttle all the way back, it just came like a house of fire, and you could barely hold on, right? And so, but that's not with the modern two-strokes. It's completely the opposite. You have a ton of power down low. You have a ton of controlled power band all the way through. Obviously, you can ring it out like a two-stroke and still have that fun, but ultimately, it's a lot better than those old bikes were.
Yeah. Hey man, my four-stroke can go like 900 miles between fill-ups. And every time I ride a two-stroke, I have to put a gas can every 65 feet just to fill up. The last two-stroke I had was in 1975, and I could only go about 3.2 miles on a tank, and I'm sure they haven't advanced any past that. One of the myths that I hear so often is that my four-stroke bike can go so much further than my two-stroke bike. Your range is dependent on the size of your fuel tank and how much you twist the throttle and what terrain you're going through. So I can't tell you how many times I've come up on somebody maybe that was on I'll just call it out, a Honda, CRF, 450X or the R, and they've put some big desert tank on their bike and they're like, I can go, 200 miles. And I say to them, and they say, and you could probably only go, I can go twice as far as you can on a tank of gas. And my response to them is, well, then you're not twisting the throttle as much as I am, you know, because the fact is, rider, how you ride and the terrain that you're riding dictates, you know, the fuel mileage that you're going to get more so than 2-stroke versus 4-stroke.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I mean, even the difference between elevation and how cold and warm it is, every motor is going to act different. Everyone's, you know, jetted their bike different. Even if everyone had the same jetting, it's still, like Kyle said, is everyone, you know, is going to use the throttle different. Everyone weighs different. Kyle loves to get whiskey throttle, so he uses more gas than I do, even on my 2-stroke. And there's been a few times that you've ran out of gas before me.
Yeah, I mean, it's historically here in the last couple of years, I've been on a 300 2-stroke. Sam's been on a 250, and we have done the same trail rides together. And say maybe 75 miles in, boom, I'm out and I switch to reserve. Whereas Sam makes it that extra 5 miles back to the truck without going on to reserve. Bikes are jetted just slightly differently, and then the 300 ends up pulling a little bit more fuel through because it's got, you know, more of a draw. But then again, some of that could be the style that we're riding. It may be that just Sam is a little bit more smooth on the throttle, whereas I'm always jamming it, trying to get that whiskey throttle. So just something that I wanted to bring up is fuel consumption. 4-stroke versus 2-stroke, it's not as wide of a gap as you might think, and it's mostly on how much you're twisting the throttle and the size of your tank. Sometimes people get all worked up about having to mix gas on 2-strokes, like it's some real big ordeal and black sorcery to be able to dump one small bottle into a much bigger bottle. I don't know. Can you pour water from one glass to another glass? Well, then you're qualified to actually mix 2-stroke. It's not that big of a deal.
You know, one of the big things for me that I was worried about moving to a 2-stroke was mixing gas. You know, you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to mix gas. But I mean, Kyle, do you ever think twice about it? Does it bug you?
I don't worry about it. You know, you can get the mixing cups, or you can actually buy oil in like pre-measured things. I'm using AMSOIL now. It's an AMSOIL Sabre. It comes pre-mixed in a little bottle. I just dump the bottle in. You know, in my truck right now, I've got a couple of those bottles. I dump it in.
At the gas station right there, so it's not, and you don't have to worry about changing your crankcase oil or anything like that, because you don't have any. It's already mixed, so it's actually one less step that you have to do when you're doing maintenance on your bike, because you're putting the oil in the gas tank, and it's super easy. You're just dumping it in. You don't have to warm the bike up, drain the oil, put the oil, check it, warm it up, and then check it again.
Yeah, you've got gear oil, but you're not changing the gear oil nearly as much as you would a motor oil.
Yeah, you're in.
So that's an advantage there.
So no worries on mixing gas. If you're thinking about that, and if that's something that you worry about, you won't even think twice about it.
Just take the plunge. Well, that brings us to the end of part 2 of our series 4-strokes versus 2-strokes for off-road/enduro riding. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the channel, come back and check out some of our other videos, and stay on the lookout for part 3 of 4-stroke versus 2-stroke. Thanks for watching, guys.